How important is salmon farming to food production overall?
Salmon farming is important. Just look at some of the numbers. Here in BC, on average, 70% of the salmon harvested each year is farmed. If you take that globally, more than half the seafood and fish that the human race consumes is farmed. The UN recently projected that's going to grow to 2/3 by 2030, which is just 12 years from now. So we're not a hunter-gatherer society. We farm food to eat it. And so we would no more shut down terrestrial beef farms, chicken farms, and hog farms and ask people to go hunt deer, go hunt wild turkeys, than we really should ask people to shut down salmon farms and all go hunt wild fish instead. Wild stocks are just simply not large enough to sustain human demand, growing human demand for healthy fish to eat. So if we want to eat fish, we need to farm it. Farming it responsibly is our passion.
It's hard for us to understand the argument to go back to fishing in the ocean for wild fish. Why would you want to do that?
Well, we need both wild and farmed salmon and other fish. And so if you meet a salmon farmer, you're actually meeting someone who's passionate about the health of wild salmon and understands the role that they play in sustaining wild salmon stocks. By providing an alternate sustainable source of salmon, it reduces pressure to overfish. If farms were to suddenly disappear, there'd be a lot more pressure on wild stocks.
And that just only makes sense. If it makes sense to us, you and me in the room, and to the association and to the farmers, and obviously to a lot of other British Columbians, how come that does not make sense to the protesters?
That's a difficult question for me to answer, really one more for them. But what I would say is that the industry's invested millions of dollars. Has come a long way in 30 years through investment in good science, involvement in good science here and around the world. Government agencies here and around the world have been involved in an awful lot of science into important topics. The interactions between wild fish and farmed fish, the interaction between farms and the natural environment. And we've gotten better and better at farming fish responsibly with the health of wild stocks and the environment front of mind as a priority.
So open net pens, explain that system and why are they a good option? Because basically this is going to lead into the big question, why can't we just move these all onto land in closed-based systems?
Well, net pen farming simulates a natural environment where the fish are raised on land in hatcheries for the first part of their life and then transferred into an ocean pen for the remainder of their life there until they grow to a full marketable size. The hatcheries are many of the same ones that provide fish to wild fish operations as well. So all of our brood stock is raised here in BC. All the eggs are from here in BC that we use.
That being said, still, why not, close down the open net pens that are causing so much concern and move to a land-based system?
What's a great soundbite, but it's not practical. The technology to do that simply doesn't exist today. There's a lot of research going on into the potential to use closed containment systems, whether on land or in the ocean. We're participating in a lot of that science, as we've been participating in science and continuing to evolve the industry over the last 30 years. But as we stand today, there is no large, viable commercial operation providing fish from a land-based operation.
But, definitely activists and some scientists will say that we can't take the risk and we should be shutting these pens down.
There's been an awful lot of research done into interactions between farms and wild stocks here on the Pacific coast, and there's been no direct evidence found that the farms are harming wild populations of salmon. And in fact, farms play a critical role in sustaining wild salmon populations by providing an alternate source of this important food to reduce overfishing.
What about disease and sea lice? Both those issues together are hot button and a big concern.
Absolutely, and real issues. So take sea lice, for example. They're a naturally occurring parasite. They affect numerous species of fish. So our fish go from their on-land hatcheries into the ocean without any sea lice on them. They pick sea lice up out there in the environment. And there's strong regulations from DFO federally regulating how much sea lice can be in place at any one time. And if there's an average of more than 3, then you have to engage some treatment. And our industry's invested in a lot of science and a lot of research and a lot of equipment to address the sea lice issue and keep those numbers down. For example, a company's investing $18 million in a new barge that'll be in place next year it'll be a liveaboard barge that'll pull up beside farms, it'll pull fish on board into a pool within the barge, and it'll use water pressure to knock the sea lice off the fish, and then the fish will be put back in the farm. We're also engaged in some really promising science about using native perch. Perch are a native hunter, if you will, of sea lice, a predator of sea lice. They pick the sea lice off other fish. So promising research underway whether having a few perch in the pens would eat the sea lice off the salmon and just naturally keep those levels down. So
using predators
yes.
to eat the parasite
yes.
in the pen.
And to keep those numbers down and address that issue. So the industry has invested millions of dollars in training, in new processes, in new technologies, in new equipment to address issues that have come up. We're part of the solution, where we're helping feed a hungry world that is demanding more fish to eat responsibly.
You say investment. What has been the economic investment and the economic return to British Columbia?
Well, right now, the industry is worth about $1.5 billion a year. It employs indirectly and directly about 6,600 people. A lot of those jobs, they're good jobs in coastal communities where other jobs have started disappearing.
There are several communities that are First Nation communities that are very opposed to fish farming and are calling for fish farming to go. What is the situation in terms of engagement with First Nations, with the industry?
Well, actually, it may not be widely understood that First Nations are actually very involved in salmon farming in BC. So our members, we've got 56 members, our members have relationships with 20 First Nations, agreements with 20 First Nations. So it's such that 78% of the salmon raised in BC is done so in partnership with First Nations. About 20% of the people who work directly in the industry are First Nations heritage. And so we're very, very involved in coastal First Nations and other communities up and down Vancouver Island and the rest of the coast.
Let me ask you about Washington State. There was the collapse, and now they banned all Atlantic salmon farming. So what can you tell British Columbians in terms of the operations here? Will that happen here? And if not, why not?
Well, regulations in Washington State and here in Canada are different. Our companies here have invested millions of dollars in modern net pens and in vessels, boats, that scrape material that can collect on pens off every couple of weeks, such that they're not weighted down. And so we've taken tremendous measures to prevent escapes, such that over the last decade or so, fewer than 100 individual fish have escaped in any one year.
Wow.
And so absolutely preventing fish escapes is important. And we've put skin in that game, as it were, and invested a lot in training, in equipment, in research and technology to prevent it from happening.
The regulator, let's talk about the regulator a little bit. Obviously, the provincial regulator is run by the NDP government, and they haven't necessarily always been totally on side with fish farming. What do you expect to have happen with this upcoming review, or the review that's going on right now?
Well, we look forward to sitting down at the table and engaging in constructive dialogue and finding constructive solutions that allow us to continue employing a lot of people in coastal communities, allow us to continue providing an important food source. It's feeding a hungry world here in Canada and around the world, while keeping the environment and the health of wild stocks front of mind. We have an important role to play in meeting global demand for healthy fish to eat, as well as local demand. We provide sustainable source of fish for grocery stores here in BC, for craft producers of smoked and candied salmon, other things like that, dried salmon. And that's important. Without farmed salmon, which is sustainable, it's reliable, it's raised in an environmentally sound manner, they wouldn't be able to operate because they wouldn't be able to source the material that they need. So just like we rely on terrestrial farms for beef, for vegetables, we need to rely on aquaculture for fish if we want to continue eating fish. And that's an important and powerful story to tell.